China, Beijing is gearing up for a crisis, one that will take place exactly 2 months from now. China is preparing itself for the return of Donald Trump and the subsequent trade war.
A renewed trade war is on the horizon. With Trump hinting at massive tariffs on Chinese exports, Beijing is making bold moves to protect its economy. But will these strategies work? Will the U.S. impose, even more, tariffs, and how does this war affect the common American citizens and the world in general? Let's dive into how China is gearing up for the fight of its economic life.
To me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff. And it's my favorite word.
The U.S.-China trade war began in 2018 under President Trump. That year, the U.S. accused China of unfair trade practices such as intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, and significant trade imbalances. Tariffs were imposed on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods from both sides, escalating tensions. The trade war disrupted global supply chains, leading to a shift in production to countries like Vietnam, India, and Mexico. Multinational companies reconsidered their manufacturing locations, with some relocating away from China to minimize risks. It also fueled protectionist sentiments worldwide, reshaping global trade policies and partnerships. Tariffs raised costs for American businesses and consumers, particularly in sectors like manufacturing and agriculture. While the intent was to reduce dependency on Chinese imports, it led to increased prices and economic strain for industries reliant on Chinese supply chains.
It causes their prices to shoot up. And when prices go up, demand goes down.
China's exports to the U.S. faced significant pressure, especially in sectors like technology and intermediate goods. And according to data, China has been experiencing the heat in significant ways.
This is China's economy compared to that of the United States, and you can see that China is actually shrinking relative to the United States, and this is using Chinese government data, which we know exaggerates the size as well as the speed of China's GDP growth.
However, China hasn't been sleeping either because it has diversified trade relationships by focusing on other markets, such as the European Union and ASEAN countries. Therefore, despite ongoing tariffs, China managed to export $501.22 billion worth of goods to the U.S. in 2023. This is according to the United Nations Comtrade database on international trade. So why was China still able to export so much? Well, this resilience was due to things like supply chain dependencies. Many U.S. businesses still rely on Chinese suppliers for cost-effective production, as the transition to alternative suppliers can be time-consuming and costly. Also, there is the issue of diversified product categories. You see, tariffs hit capital and intermediate goods hardest, but consumer goods like electronics and apparel, categories less affected by tariffs, continued flowing into the U.S. However, this too is about to change. Every product is about to be hit hard by the new Trump tariffs. But before we see how China is reacting to these tariffs, let us analyze the products that would receive significant changes and how everything is going to affect U.S. citizens. Well, first off, the proposed tariff increase is not a new thing whether to Trump or previous presidents. In fact, every United States president in the previous years has been at war with China.
I will not stand by when our competitors don't play by the rules.
Look, we've been losing over many years, 4, 5, $600 billion a year.
China has an overall goal, and I don't criticize them for the goal.
We've brought trade cases against China at nearly twice the rate as the last administration.
They have an overall goal to become the leading country in the world, the wealthiest country in the world, and the most powerful country in the world.
We're losing, a few years ago, 200 routinely to China. We can't do that.
That's not going to happen on my watch, because the United States is going to continue to grow and expand.
If the playing field is level, I promise you, America will always win.
The only difference is that this time around, Trump is taking the taxes up a notch. The president-elect has proposed significant tariff increases on Chinese goods and imports from other U.S. trading partners. This move could raise prices for a wide range of products, including electronics, clothing, and toys. With proposed levies of up to 100%, economists warn that U.S. consumers will feel the financial impact of these measures in their everyday spending.
Because that would have an effect on a whole range of American companies, companies that use Chinese parts, companies that source in China to make cars or various other things. And also, if you go into your neighborhood Walmart or Target, it's going to raise the price of all the goods that they import from China and sell to you as a consumer. So For specific purposes, yes.
Indeed, electronics are expected to experience substantial price hikes, particularly for items like smartphones, laptops, tablets, and video game consoles. Since many of these products are imported from China, their prices could soar. The Consumer Technology Association estimates that the cost of laptops and tablets could rise by 46%, while smartphones might see a 26% increase. Video and audio equipment, of which about 90% is imported, would also be significantly affected. Clothing prices are likely to rise as well. Apparel items such as jeans, t-shirts, and sweatshirts, most of which are imported from China, Bangladesh, and Vietnam, would become more expensive. The National Retail Federation predicts a 20% price increase for clothing. For example, a $50 cotton sweater could climb to $60, and men's jeans priced at $80 might increase to $96. With more than 80% of U.S. clothing being imported, these price jumps could hit consumers hard. Toys and dolls, heavily reliant on imports from China, are expected to face some of the steepest price increases. Tariffs could lead to a 55% surge in toy prices, reducing consumer spending power by approximately $14 billion. For instance, a $50 tricycle might increase by $28, while a plush toy costing $17 could rise to $27. Given that 90% of U.S. toys are imported, this category is particularly vulnerable to the proposed tariffs. And the effects of all these? Well, if it wasn't already clear, economists believe these tariffs would likely cost the average U.S. household about $2,600 yearly. While Trump's transition team argues that these measures will bolster U.S. jobs and wages, the rising costs of everyday goods could strain many families' budgets. Experts warn that such tariffs could drive up inflation, forcing Americans to rethink their shopping habits and spending priorities. So if the U.S. citizens will be greatly affected, then why is Trump insistent on raising tariffs on Chinese products? Donald Trump's insistence on raising tariffs on Chinese products, despite the potential negative impact on U.S. consumers, stems from a combination of economic, political, and strategic considerations. Trump has consistently criticized the large trade deficit the U.S. has with China, viewing it as a sign of unfair trade practices. By imposing tariffs, he aims to reduce this imbalance by encouraging domestic production and reducing reliance on imports from China. The Trump tariffs are also aimed at pressuring tactics for negotiations, punishing alleged unfair trade practices, and protecting the United States from any form of military or espionage threats. Additionally, the president-elect announced his intent to impose an additional 10% tariff on Chinese imports, citing the continued flow of drugs into the U.S. despite previous discussions. On Truth Social, Trump stated, quote, "I have had many talks with China about the massive amounts of drugs, in particular fentanyl, being sent into the United States, but to no avail." He added that while Chinese officials promised severe penalties for drug dealers, such as the death penalty, they failed to follow through, allowing drugs to continue entering the U.S., primarily through Mexico at unprecedented levels. Amid escalating tensions, Trump also announced plans to implement a 25% tariff on goods from Mexico and Canada. Justifying the move, he claimed that thousands of people are pouring through Mexico and Canada, bringing crime and drugs at levels never seen before. He further criticized the current state of the U.S. borders and pledged to sign an executive order imposing the tariffs on his first day back in office. Trump also wants to strengthen domestic manufacturing. His America First agenda emphasized revitalizing American manufacturing and bringing jobs back to the U.S. By making imported goods more expensive through tariffs, the administration sought to incentivize companies to produce goods domestically rather than outsourcing to countries like China.
Number one is for protection of the companies that we have here and the new companies that will move in, because we're going to have thousands of companies coming into this country. We're going to grow it like it's never grown before, and we're going to protect them.
So, how has the Chinese responded to these proposed tariff hikes?
Beijing just has 2 months, 60 days to prepare for 60% tariffs. So they're scrambling to Trump-proof their trade.
China has announced measures to support its export sector in navigating external trade restrictions, which are expected to intensify under the incoming Donald Trump administration. In a notice recently, the Ministry of Commerce outlined plans to provide direct assistance to exporters, helping them address, quote, unreasonable foreign trade restrictions, and create a favorable external environment for exports. The ministry's 9-point plan aims to promote the stable growth of foreign trade and consolidate and enhance the trend of positive economic recovery, recovery. Key measures include expanding export credit insurance coverage and increasing financial support for enterprises engaged in international trade. Provinces with significant cross-border trade activity were urged to take a leading role in implementing these policies. The ministry also stated, quote, "All localities must intensify efforts to promote policy implementation, and major foreign trade provinces must take the lead and better play their roles." The notice also highlighted efforts to maintain the stability of the yuan's exchange rate and expand its use in international settlements. This aligns with China's broader goal of increasing the yuan's role in global trade to reflect its growing economic influence. But while this 9-point plan awaits execution, China has simply cautioned that no one will win a trade war. Liu Pengyu, the spokesman for the Chinese embassy in the U.S., responded to Trump's proposed tariff increase on X, formerly Twitter. Liu emphasized the mutual benefits of U.S.-China trade, stating, "About the issue of U.S. tariffs on China, China believes that China-U.S. economic and trade cooperation is mutually beneficial in nature. No one will win a trade war or a tariff war." Liu also highlighted recent progress in counter-narcotics cooperation between the two nations, mentioning that Chinese authorities have resumed communication with their U.S. counterparts since the San Francisco summit. According to Liu, China has taken action on cases requested by the U.S. and notified American authorities of advancements in operations targeting narcotics. He disputed claims that China knowingly allows fentanyl precursors to enter the U.S., saying such assertions contradict the facts. So far, it seems China is maintaining a calm position on the matter. However, one harsh way they can retaliate to Trump's tariffs is to simply increase the price of exported goods to the U.S. by the percentage of tariffs paid. This means that American consumers would end up suffering the most. This is one way the U.S.-China trade war could escalate. But before we explore other terrible ways it could get worse, we need to know if China is alone in this or if the world is affected as well. The truth is, China is not alone in this trade mess. The United States' three biggest trading partners, Mexico, China, and Canada, have all been threatened with tariff hikes by Trump. However, while Canada and Mexico are getting up to 25% hike on all goods, China may get from 35% to 60%. When you consider this, you might ask yourself, what did China do wrong, and are they really a threat to the U.S.? Well, experts have dissenting opinions about this. Some feel China is misunderstood.
Is China, China, China? What is the biggest misconception that Americans have about China?
First of all, China's no threat at all to American democracy, and it's no threat at all to American security. China is not going to war with the United States. China could not defeat the United States.
There are even Americans who feel America has just been vengeful towards China.
We feel like China has betrayed us by not living up to our expectations. And so we're seeing now in this whole sort of discourse on the so-called failure of engagement. Like we believe that, out of the goodness of our hearts, we extended this hand to China, believing that they would become just like us. And when they didn't, we feel insulted, we feel aggrieved.
Then there are those who think the United States is a bully.
What China wants is for the United States Stop bullying us.
But what about those on the other side? In contrast, Edward M. Feasel, an economist and university president, suggested that some level of tariff might benefit the U.S. by addressing the displacement of workers caused by globalization and trade. He noted the political consequences of such economic dislocations, as many Americans have grown disillusioned with free trade policies. Feasel argued that an optimal tariff rate could strike a balance between protecting American jobs and avoiding excessive consumer costs. In addition, columnist and editor for the Washington Times, Bill Gertz, also sees China as a threat that needs addressing.
It's my view that China poses the greatest long-term strategic threat to the United States than anything.
His opinion is corroborated by politician Mike Pompeo.
This is not a democratic nation. This is not a nation that shares our value system. And this is not a nation that we should, for one moment, think doesn't present a threat to the United States of America.
Well, it's clear that China probably poses the biggest national security threat to the United States right now.
Anyway, do you think China is really a threat to the U.S.? Let us know in the comments below. But before we go, let us explore how far this trade war could go. The U.S.-China trade war poses significant risks, with worst-case scenarios spanning economic, political, and global security domains. For one, escalating tariffs and decoupling efforts could fragment global supply chains, raising costs for businesses and consumers globally. This could lead to higher prices for goods, inflation, and slower economic growth. A prolonged trade war could destabilize both economies. Given the U.S. and China's massive global economic influence, the ripple effects could trigger a global recession. Also, protectionist measures might shield some industries, but could result in massive job losses in sectors reliant on trade. For example, during past trade conflicts such as U.S.-Japan, job losses in manufacturing and related industries were significant. Additionally, the U.S. restrictions on Chinese access to advanced technologies, such as semiconductors, could fuel a race for technological self-sufficiency. This would not only delay innovation, but might force companies worldwide to choose sides, fragmenting the global tech industry. Economic competition might spill over into geopolitical tensions, particularly in regions like Taiwan or the South China Sea, increasing the risk of military conflict. Continuous trade disputes could undermine the World Trade Organization and weaken global rules-based trade frameworks. And a full decoupling scenario could lead to a Cold War dynamic, isolating the two largest economies. This would erode cooperation on critical global issues like climate change, public health, and AI safety. Lastly, many developing countries rely heavily on trade and investment from both the U.S. and China. Prolonged tensions could reduce foreign direct investment and disrupt infrastructure projects like China's Belt and Road Initiative, leaving these nations economically stranded. However, whether these tariffs will achieve their intended goals or lead to unintended consequences remains to be seen. One thing is certain: the ripple effects of these policies will shape trade, technology, and international relations for years to come. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more in-depth breakdowns of the biggest stories shaping our world.